Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. So starting out here with the Ioniq 5 rear wheel drive, the trim levels aren't going to be so much of a focus in this video comparison because obviously I don't have both of them available in the top limited trim or vice versa. So we're going to be going with what we got here. This is a 2023 Hyundai Ioniq 5 SE rear wheel drive. So it still has the larger battery pack, should have about the same amount of power output as that Ioniq 6 Limited, which we'll jump in here in a second. But overall, I just want to see how each one drives, see how similar they drive in terms of the ride quality, the handling, everything like that. So let's not waste any time and get right into it. So once again, starting out here in the Ioniq 5, this is actually the first time I've driven the Ioniq 5 in the rear-wheel drive form because as you guys know, if you follow along here on the channel, you'll know I had a all-wheel drive SEL for about a week to create a ton of content with. And overall, I was very happy with the driving dynamics and overall experience with the Ioniq 5 over that period of time. And I have to say, it'll be interesting to see how the Ioniq 6 stacks up versus this vehicle because I think it's gotten a ton of praise. So we'll go ahead and do a quick acceleration here onto this main roadway. Oh, that's not too bad. So this is actually the first time I've driven a rear-wheel drive in either of these two vehicles, and they just so happen to both be rear-wheel drive as the comparison goes. But nonetheless, I'm actually very happy with the performance of a single motor here in this vehicle. As a whole, it's going to have less output and power than that of the all-wheel drive versions, but nonetheless, it's still plenty sufficient for acceleration. And I have to say, for my first acceleration, it was quite good. So immediately, my first impressions are just how quiet these vehicles, well, at least the Ioniq 5 is on the interior, and I fully expect to be the same for the Ioniq 6. And if you guys haven't been following along here on the channel or haven't seen my week-long test with the 2023 Hyundai Ioniq 5 SEL all-wheel drive, make sure to go check that video series out. There's a lot of useful information. I had a great time experiencing an electric vehicle really for the first time over a substantial period of time. And overall, I think there's a lot of useful information. So make sure to go check that series out if you guys haven't already. But so far, I am reminded just how comfortable and softly sprung these vehicles are. Sure, it's got plenty of handling and dynamics, which we'll test out here on the interstate on my usual test loop. But overall, it's a very comfortable, very soft ride, and it's really not on the sporty side of things, at least in this vehicle. I will be interested to see how the Ioniq 6 stacks up. But very comfortable daily driver, cruiser down the interstate, anything like that. Handling is very good, even with the standard 19-inch wheels on the Ioniq 5. So I am going to be curious to see what the overall efficiency rating is. I did just reset the trip-o-meter in this Ioniq 5, and we will do the same in the 6. I'm going to try to do my best to obey or follow the speed limits relatively closely so we get an even comparison and do the same acceleration and stuff like that. But it is going to be interesting to see because as we know, in my all-wheel drive, about 5 to 6 days with the Ioniq 5 all-wheel drive, I averaged about 2.8 miles per kilowatt hour, if I do recall correctly, in that vehicle. And I would assume the rear-wheel drive is just going to be more efficient. And speaking of efficiency, it actually is quite windy out today, so that might have a slight negative impact in the driving. But nonetheless, the conditions are going to be comparable for an equal comparison. And one thing I guess that's not really quite related to this review and driving comparison is we actually had a confirmed tornado touchdown right up here. Hopefully I will capture it with the other camera and show you guys some of the damage. But it was technically rated at an EF2, very brief at that, but did take out this entire gas station. And yep, I would say that is completely destroyed. But nonetheless, it was quite impressive severe weather for this area and definitely a strong way to kick off the severe weather season. But coming up here to my rough section of road I always like to test on. The Ioniq 5 is just extremely smooth, even over much of the roughest pavement you can find. This does have 19-inch wheels on it with fairly beefy sidewalls as the tires are fairly large. For being a 19-inch, it's not really a low profile or anything like that, but it is very comfortable nonetheless over this harsh pavement. And I fully expect the Ioniq 6 to carry the same weight, but it will be interesting to see to compare how firm it is, as many of the reviews online have stated it is a little bit firmer, but overall still very comfortable. Now, from a driving and seating position inside the Ioniq 5, I have to say, I'm not sure if it's just this particular vehicle the SE trim in general, but it does feel like I'm stretching my arms quite a bit, and I have the steering column pulled all the way out for the telescopic feature. I don't recall this being the case in the SEL I had just a few months ago. Maybe I'll have to sit in one of the other trim levels to see whether or not that is the case, but it just seems like I'm sitting a little bit farther away from the steering wheel than I would like. But nonetheless, the seats in this cloth trim are quite comfortable still, even being a base model. It is a little bit on the scratchy or rough side. It's extremely quiet here on the inside. I have to say, even on a breezy, windy day like this, it's impressive how quiet. And again, this is the entry-level Ioniq 5. I believe most of them do have the same glass setup. There's no dual pane or laminated glass on the higher trim levels like some other Hyundai vehicles, but it is extremely quiet. You can have a normal conversation under normal volume levels. You don't have to raise your voice in this vehicle, and from that perspective, it is quite impressive. The powertrain, being a single rear motor, is still plenty powerful in terms of acceleration like I experienced at the beginning of this video. Quite impressive for everyday driving, and should still put out a fairly quick 0 to 60 time, I would think even in the mid 6 second or less range, which is quicker than most vehicles out there on the road. Let's go ahead and give it another acceleration test. Yeah, it's plenty quick for the average person. And I would say, again, it's in the mid 6 second range, if not just a hair quicker. Of course, we know the dual motor all-wheel drive version, like I did in my other videos, had a mid 4 second 0 to 60 time. So there is going to be a couple second difference between these two powertrains, but you're going to get a lot more range out of the single motor setup. And of course, better efficiency, given there's only one motor providing the power to the vehicle. But as a whole, I have no complaints with the acceleration here on this single motor Ioniq 5. I guess it is worth noting that I will have both vehicles on level 2 regen. Not that that's a huge deal, but it will be interesting to see if the regen feels identical between them. The weight is another thing to mention, in that they are extremely similar. I have to look up the exact difference between these two, but I believe it's less than 150 pounds of a weight deficit going to the Ioniq 6 versus the 5, and that is a little bit surprising given the 5 is an overall boxier, larger vehicle. Merging onto the interstate, again, no problems. Acceleration is easy here in this vehicle. So we're headed about directly into the wind, it feels like, and it is moving the vehicle around quite a bit. But again, it is a very stable vehicle. It is quite hefty in the mid 4,000 pound range. So it really is quite stable nonetheless, but it is worth noting that it will get moved around, as will any vehicle in very windy conditions like we have today. And going around this tight turn here, see what the handling feels like. That low center of gravity in electric vehicles is just something else. It feels amazing. Yes, it has some body roll. Most vehicles that are softly sprung or more on the comfortable side of things will have a decent amount of body roll, but the Ioniq 5 handles fantastic. Even if it has the EV-oriented, more efficient tires on them all seasons, they are still going to be plenty full of grip for many everyday driving scenarios. So really, no complaints there. I guess speaking of this being a rear-wheel drive, or both these vehicles being rear-wheel drive, that is something to bring up in terms of snowy conditions. Now, I would think this vehicle would get around pretty good, especially with the built-in snow mode for the drive modes, even being rear-wheel drive on the all-season tires. But of course, you can always swap out the tires for snow tires if you live in the Midwest or in the northern side of the United States that does have a longer winter, and it should perform flawlessly, no issues. As most vehicles, even my personal vehicle, I do switch out the tires seasonally for better winter or cold temperature performance. So if that's an issue with a single rear motor vehicle for you, such as this of the Ioniq 5, I would highly recommend checking out winter tires. And then you combine that too with the snow mode built into the dry mode system, and it really should not have a problem getting around, especially due to the extra weight of this vehicle, giving you a little bit more mechanical grip, again, not being limited by the tires. And one of the things I will be interested to see, just as far as the driver feel or the driver seating position, is going to be how it feels in the front seat of the Ioniq 6, given the Ioniq 5 has a quite open center console design. Of course, it's completely open to that of the front passenger seat in front of the center console. The door panel is pretty much out of the way. I don't have any leg issues as far as contacting the door panel. I don't believe that's going to be an issue in the Ioniq 6 either. The column and the shifter stock is well out of the way of my knee. I know that is a common complaint for some people who are on the taller side of things or have longer legs in both vehicles, but specifically more so in the Ioniq 6. 6, as it does sit just a hair lower. So final efficiency for the Ioniq 5 rear-wheel drive, but it says 3.7 miles per kilowatt hour. As you can see, just under 15 miles total driven when I reset the information. But let's go ahead and jump in the Ioniq 6, see how the overall driving feel is and how similar it is to that of the Ioniq 5, and see which one I like a little bit better. Okay, so setting out here in the Ioniq 6, I have to immediately say it feels like a sedan. Feels like you're sitting a little bit lower to the ground, and that's really the seating position. Just feels more traditional, like that of a compact mid-size sedan rather than an SUV, where you're sitting up just a little bit higher. And I do have to say, my immediate first impressions, while this car is riding on 20-inch wheels with maybe a little bit more sporty compound of a tire, it does feel like it rides just a hair firmer than that of the 5. Again, not an apples to apples comparison given this is the 20-inch wheel version, but I would imagine the suspension tuning is going to be just a touch more stiff or more sporty than that of the 5. Let's go ahead and give the same acceleration here starting out. Yeah, acceleration feels identical between them. From a driver's seating position, I have to say there's about the same amount of legroom for my legs. Obviously plenty far away here on the driver's side from the door panel. No issues with that. I do see how if they did not sculpt the door panel out like they did, how it would be an issue for many people with their legs, the way it rests on the seat, and of course in proximity to that of the door panel. As for the center console, I will say in my normal driving position here with my leg resting on the accelerator pedal like I normally would have it, it is within an inch or so of the edge of the console. It does have this hard kind of textured plastic, so I could see how taller people with longer legs might have a slight issue or would want to, I guess, test drive this vehicle in their seating position before buying it. But nonetheless, my leg is a little bit closer to that of the column stock here, so I could see how that may present an issue if you have a certain type of seating position or depending on where everything is set inside of the vehicle. Yeah, I gotta admit, the handling feels better inside of the Ioniq 6 than the 5, just because it probably has a lower center of gravity. Obviously, it's riding on a little bit lower profile of tire with probably a little bit more aggressive compounded tire. And overall, I would just say the suspension tuning is probably a little bit more on the sporty, traditional sedan side of things versus that of the Ioniq 5, which is probably a little bit more traditional SUV, larger vehicle in general. Now, in terms of noise levels or the wind noise that I can hear on a day like this, I have to say very comparable. I don't really hear any major differences. It's not like you need to raise your voice to talk to your passengers inside of this vehicle. So as a whole, I think both Ioniq vehicles are extremely quiet and very comfortable for day-to-day use. So we are now coming up to the rough road section of pavement. See how the ride is, see if I can tell if it's any stiffer or not. And I have to say, very comfortable once again, no issues with comfort. I want to say that it is a hair stiffer. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say the suspension tuning is slightly different and this vehicle is just a touch stiffer. But again, I would definitely drive these vehicles back to back if you're interested in both or just curious about which one drives better from a driver's perspective. But I have to say, I do think the Ioniq 6 is a little bit stiffer. And one thing I noticed with the gauge cluster, I'm not exactly sure if this is just a limited thing or some of the updated technology inside this vehicle, but it does have pedestrian sign detection. It appears like, I don't know if it's reading it from the camera-based system inside the vehicle or whether or not it's pulling it from the navigation and GPS data, but it is showing up not only sharp curves on the road, but also it showed up the yellow sign in the little pedestrians here in the gauge cluster, which the Ioniq 5 did not. Okay, it's definitely reading it from the signs or the camera system because it just pulled up a stop sign, and here we are on the main road through the small town, and it said stop. So yeah, that's a little bizarre, but it appears to be reading these signs and putting it on the gauge cluster, which is a very cool technology. I think the traffic sign recognition is very handy in certain conditions, especially if you are on an unfamiliar road. But clearly it's displaying information that probably should not be displayed on this roadway. So coming up here on the interstate, we'll go ahead and send it through these corners, see what it feels like suspension-wise and handling. I've got to say, feels like a little bit more of a sedan. which means a little bit sportier. Yep, I'm going to go with the fact that I like the way this one drives better than the Ioniq 5. I'm just used to cars in general, lower center of gravity vehicles, and yeah, I like the way the Ioniq 6 drives a little bit better. And I guess one other thing to note while we're talking about the seating position and the overall driving characteristics is that the hood slopes down a lot more on the Ioniq 6 to the point where you almost can't even see it. Where on the Ioniq 5 you can see it depending on your seating position. So that is worth noting that it is possible to see the hood in certain scenarios of the Ioniq 5, where really the Ioniq 6 slopes down so much and the front end is so short where you really don't see it at all. And if you guys have watched my walk around tour of the Ioniq 6 Limited, make sure to do that if you haven't already. I will say I prefer the steering wheel controls like they are on the Ioniq 5 and a lot of previous Hyundai vehicles. Now moving forward, it appears they're going to be much like this of the Ioniq 6, where the cruise control is on the left side, radio infotainment controls are on the right side. I prefer them flipped, and again, how they are in the Ioniq 5. So I like cruise control on the right side, radio audio controls on the left side, because typically I find myself, well, maybe I'm just used to it in general, but I find myself wanting to adjust the volume here on the left side, which obviously that is now inverted, and here on the right side. Kia has done this for many years as well, but maybe it has to do with the radio controls being closer to the infotainment screen, so people don't have to reach or change their position too much as far as the steering wheel goes. I don't know. I prefer them like they are in the Ioniq 5 and inverted compared to the newer Hyundai vehicles. And speaking of these steering wheel controls, I will say the switchgear and some of the controls here on the inside of the 6 are going to be a little bit nicer. I do like the fact that the buttons on the steering wheel are individual buttons rather than a quadrant type in the 5, to where if you press one corner of the 4 quadrants on the wheel, the whole button tilts and shifts and moves, where these are all individual. So if you press a button, you know that's the one you're pressing. And I would say they're a little bit easier to read, still in gloss black, still look very nice. So what is my final impressions between these two Ioniqs? Well, I have to say, I definitely liked how the Ioniq 6 drove just a little bit better than that of the Ioniq 5. However, I think if you're looking at this from a practicality standpoint, I have to say the Ioniq 5 is still a clear winner in my mind, given the overall boxy hatchback shape of the vehicle. Now, not to say the sedan is unusable like I mentioned in my side-by-side comparison video, but I just think the body style of the Ioniq 5 is just a clear winner when it comes to practicality, overall usability on a daily basis, assuming you are hauling some cargo frequently throughout the week. But like I mentioned, if that is not a priority to you, you just need the overall driving dynamics, hauling 1, 2, maybe 4 people around inside of the cabin, a few items here and there inside of the trunk, then I think the Ioniq 6 definitely is still very practical for an everyday daily driver. And like I said, I think it drove just a little bit better than that of the 5, which to me drives a little bit of a floaty, a little bit softer overall. So I definitely think there's some suspension tuning done to the 6 to make it feel just a little bit sportier. However, I think both of them drive fairly well and have the instantaneous torque of electric vehicles. So from that aspect, I think they both drive very well. But from an overall handling, ride dynamic standpoint, I like the 6 just a little bit better. Now let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, whether you own an Ioniq 5 or looking to upgrade to an Ioniq 6 or new to the Hyundai EVs in general. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. I know the Ioniq 6 is still brand new to the market, so not a lot of them are out there to be able to be test driven. The one here has sold. It actually sold the same day that I filmed this driving impressions video, which does not surprise me. And it'll definitely take a while to get some more inventory out there. But if you're interested in the Ioniq 5s, there is a lot of inventory out there where they do sell these vehicles. So make sure to check out your local dealership if you are indeed interested in one of these vehicles, because chances are they probably have an Ioniq 5 for you to test drive, even if they don't have the 6 quite yet. But regardless, hopefully you guys enjoyed and found something helpful out of it. If you did, please hit that like button. It greatly helps out the channel and these videos. Subscribe if you guys are not already subscribed, and make sure to check out some other content I have here on the channel. So with all that being said, hopefully you guys enjoyed, and hope to see you guys in the next one.